Why do we lift weights? Here on the Lifting Cues podcast, I'm here to answer all of your hard-hitting lifting questions. You might be wondering, that's not that hard of a hitter. Why do we lift weights? To get more jacked and get stronger, obviously. What's there to talk about? Podcast over. But I am here to answer how we get bigger and how we get stronger. It's not just enough to lift weights. We have to know how to make progress to continue to get bigger and continue to get stronger and continue to make those adaptations toward our goal. So we're going to be talking today all about the concept of progressive overload. And that is how we continue to push ourselves and make progress toward our goal. Whether your goal is to get strong enough to get on the platform, to get big enough to get on stage, or just to look and feel better at the pool, if we are not making progress and if we're not progressively overloading, we're not going to make the adaptations that are going to get us to our goal. We will just stay in the same place. We all know those people in the gym who come in, they do the same routine with the same weights every day, every week, and they look the same every week, every month, and every year. How do we avoid becoming one of those people? And today, that's what we're going to go over, is how we continue to progressively overload and all of the different ways that we can progressively overload so that we continue to make progress, we don't stall out, and that we can pull multiple levers in our training to make sure that we continue to make progress. Thank you very much for tuning into this episode of the Lifting Cues podcast. I'm your host, Coach Quinn, aka Coach Q. I'm an online and in-person fitness coach who specializes in training and nutrition plans for building strength and muscle. And as a lifter for over half of my life, now in my 30s on the journey to becoming a competitive powerlifter, I'm going to use all of my experience as a lifter and my experience as a coach helping real people get real results to give you the best lifting cues to make sure that you reach your goals as well. So today's cue, again, all about progressive overload. It is a concept that is as old as time. If you spent any time in the gym, I'm sure you've heard this term. Where does it come from? So there is an old story from ancient Greece of Milo and the bull. Milo grew up on a farm, and one day a calf was born. Milo decided to start carrying this calf around on his back every single day. As the calf got bigger, grew into a full-grown bull, Milo got stronger. Hence, doing a little bit more every single day gets you stronger. Led him to becoming one of the original Olympic champions and a legend in ancient Greece that lives on today. And it is a concept that we still use in our training because it is tried and true. Again, if you are not continuing to make progress, your body has no reason to adapt any further and grow more muscle or get any stronger, and you will just stay in the same place. We want to avoid this. Obviously, if we're spending the time, we're putting the time into the gym, and we said, why did we lift? When we first started, it was to build muscle and get stronger. Now, we know there are so many other benefits to just your general health, your mental health, emotional health, the social and community aspect of the gym that all come along with it. But the reason we're pushing ourselves in there every single day or, however many times a week is to get bigger and stronger. How do we ensure that we do that? Again, progressive overload. So I'm going to define progressive overload the way that I do so that you understand where I'm coming from as we talk through this. You know exactly the perspective and what we're trying to accomplish with each method of progressive overload. So what is it to me? Progressive overload is the concept of increasing training intensity over time with the goal of getting stronger or bigger or just continuing to make adaptations toward our goal. So we have to continue to increase the intensity that we're doing in the gym. Now, the reason I don't say we need to keep increasing weight or volume, something very simple like that, is because there are various methods that we can use to progressively overload. So we have to have some variable of control to know if we're actually making progress. That is going to be intensity. And intensity, we're going to define two different ways. It's the same thing, but there's just two concepts, and one of them usually makes more sense to people than others. So I'm going to define intensity as RPE, or rate of perceived exertion. So this is a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being chilling on your couch watching Netflix, 10 being the hardest thing you've ever done, absolute failure on a lift. So that's the sliding scale there. So you'll rate each set from 1 to 10 based on how hard it was, how hard you perceived it to be. The other measure of intensity is RIR, or reps in reserve. So this is basically just the inverse of RPE. So this scale goes down to 0. I don't put a top number on it because you can be any number from reps in reserve when you start a set. But you want to focus on, at the end of the set, how many reps did you have left in the tank before failure? 0 RIR being that failure point. So understanding how to push that intensity up. And when we're talking about intensity for strength and muscle gains, what range do we really want to focus on? So for strength, we probably want to get to at least a 6 or 7 out of 10 on most of our hard working sets. So because strength requires us to lift heavier and heavier loads to continue to build strength, we want to stay a little bit further away from failure in most of our training. There will be time for those max outputs and those maximum loads, but we're going to program those into our training so that we're able to recover. But when you start lifting significantly heavy weight, keeping it a little bit further away from failure will allow you to recover, and it won't be detrimental to your session. But we want to get to at least that 6 or 7 out of 10. And if you don't know what a 6 or 7 out of 10 really feels like, the first thing you need to do is understand what a 10 feels like. When you absolutely cannot do another rep, that is 10. So my best advice is to find a safe exercise that you feel very comfortable doing and that you feel comfortable failing, and push yourself all the way to failure. Start with isolation exercises like a leg extension, a leg curl, bicep curls, tricep pushdowns. Push yourself to failure there. Then pick like a safer compound exercise like a row or a machine press or even a leg press with the safety up, so that when you do fail that rep, there's not that risk of crushing yourself. You're not doing it first time with a barbell on your back, not knowing how to bail. That's not the way I want you to find intensity. But if you understand what a 10 feels like, a true 10, push yourself all the way to that absolute failure point when you absolutely cannot do another rep, so that you know where you are on that scale, whether you're using RPE, that perceived exertion. It kind of matches up with RIR. So a 6 or 7 RPE is probably about 3 or 4 reps away from failure. It's probably a 3 or 4 RIR. Again, whichever one makes more sense in your head. That is the goal, is to get to that training intensity, because that is what ultimately is going to decide our adaptation, especially for muscle growth. Now, for muscle growth, we can take that RIR probably a little bit higher to, or I guess RIR would be lower, RPE would be higher, to an 8, 9, 10 RPE. We don't have to go all the way to failure, but getting to a 2 or 1 RIR, again, if you understand what actual failure is, 2 to 1 RIR is really freaking hard. It's really intense. So getting to that point for muscle growth is probably what you want to look at for intensity. So when you see a rep range in your program, the goal is to pick a weight in that rep range that matches the intensity that is put on the program. If there is no intensity in your program, A, get a new program. B, figure out what the goal is of the exercise that you're doing. So if you're doing like 3 sets of 5 barbell back squats, the goal is probably more strength. If you're in that 1 to 5 or 6 rep range, you're probably more focused on strength, or at least I would imagine that was the goal of the programmer. But make sure that you're testing out that RPE and being around that 6 or 7 at that 5th rep, picking a weight on that fifth rep that gets you to that intensity. If the goal is more muscle building, so it's more of an isolation exercise or just accessory movements in general, you're probably going to want to push that intensity a little bit higher. And on exercises that are on, machines where it's a little more stable, it's a little safer, we can push that intensity higher because the recovery cost won't be quite as high. If you think about, putting a barbell on your back and squatting to, a 9 RPE, that's going to be really taxing to your central nervous system. It may affect the rest of your session. It may affect the rest of your week. So making sure that intensity is matched so that you can finish out your session, maybe the other accessory exercises get pushed to that intensity. So that's what we're talking about when we're thinking about intensity, is how do we get a weight and continue to progress either in weight, reps, or the other variables that we'll go over to make sure that we continue to match that intensity. Because if we just continue to do the same weight at an 8 RPE, eventually that will no longer be an 8. So we're not getting the same adaptation if we're not at that intensity. So that's really how I want you to think about progressive overload and intensity and how they come together. We need to continue to progress the exercises in some way to continue to match the intensity, because we will adapt and it will get easier over time. You can see if you're doing the same weight and the same reps, it won't be at the same intensity in 2 weeks from now as it is now, let alone months and years from now if we're still doing the same sets on bench as we've been doing forever. So if you want to continue to adapt, make sure that you understand where your intensity is at, and then we can understand how to progress in weight. So the first one that we want to go over is just adding weight to the bar. This is the first method of progressive overload. This is the easiest one to understand, and this is the first place to really start, especially when you start out as a beginner. Adding weight to the bar is pretty easy. Strength is more of a motor skill development, neurological process than necessarily just a muscle growth process. So as you learn how to do movements and learn how to control your body, you will get stronger much quicker than you will gain muscle. So adding weight to the bar at first will be pretty simple. You should be able to continue to add weight each week to your lifts, and that will show you that you're getting stronger. Now, even if you're more advanced and you just haven't been really focused on strength training, you can still apply this concept. If you haven't been focusing on just adding weight to the bar and really maximizing your strength, you should be able to make progress with this no matter where you're at. So for me, again, I've been lifting for almost 20 years, and this past year, the start of this past year, I decided to start training for powerlifting. And I haven't really been training for strength at this point for about like a decade. So I decided to start doing this, and my squat was at 435 when I tested myself before we started training. And this is the beginning of the year. My meet was April 21st or something like that, end of April. So from that time at 435 to April, I put on 50 pounds on my squat. I squatted 485 at the meet. And that is because I just kept adding weight to the bar each week. We went down in reps as we went, and I just kept adding weight to the bar until I no longer could, and that got me to that new max. Now that I've gotten sufficiently strong, I have to change that up. But it goes to show, if you're not just adding weight to the bar and you're not focused on that, this can still be a variable that you can pull, and it will continue to help you make progress. Now, how do we think about when to add weight to the bar? So, like I said, say you're doing 3 sets of 5 squat at a 7 RPE. So you have a weight that you want to do. You're picking a weight that you could probably do for like 8 reps if you're trying to get a 7 RPE for 5 reps. And eventually, as you do that weight for your sets of 5, that intensity score should go down. You should be able to rate it lower than a 7 at some point. When you do that, it is time to bump it up in weight. Now, how far you bump up depends on what that rate of perceived exertion was. So if you went from a 7 to a 6, maybe we just bump up 5 pounds, do another 5. It was a 7. Okay, great. We'll progress there until it is a 6 again. If it goes down to like a 5, you make a big jump. Maybe we make a 10-pound jump. So continuing to add weight in the bar to match that intensity. This is where intensity plays in. I'm going to keep repeating this because intensity is so, so important for how we make sure that we are making these adaptations. So we want to continue to get stronger. We will continue to add weight to the bar. Eventually, we know this process will stall out. As you get significantly heavy and significantly strong, it gets harder and harder to make those jumps. Also, when we get to significantly heavy weights, it's harder and harder to train that way. It's harder and harder to recover. The idea of putting another 5 pounds on the bar for a set of 5 is getting to the point where it's mentally taxing. It's physically exhausting. So it's harder to get through the session. It's harder to recover from it. Is it worth putting more weight on the bar, or is there something else that we can do? Now, you might be wondering, if I just really want to build muscle, like I want to be decently strong, but my goal is really muscle building. Do I need to get super strong? Do I need to keep adding weight to the bar? Partially, yes. So adding weight to the bar is a great way to track if you are actually building muscle. So say your goal is to build muscle. You're looking at the scale, you see it start to go up. But is it all really muscle, or am I actually building muscle, or am I just getting fluffy? But if you're adding weight to the bar and getting stronger in the gym and gaining weight, there's a really good correlation that a good amount of that is muscle and that you are gaining muscle. So even at the start of your journey, adding weight to the bar can be a great way to track your progress for muscle gain purposes. Your rep ranges will probably be higher, but still adding weight to the bar in those rep ranges is really going to be the key to helping you. So what happens when that weight on the bar finally stalls out, or we get to the point where it's just not worth it from a recovery perspective, or the mental aspect is really taking its toll and we're like, I just can't add any more weight, or I don't want to add any more weight to the bar. I feel good at this level. If I go up anymore, it's taken too much of my recovery. It's taken too much of my mental capacity to get in the gym. I'm losing that joy to get in the gym. It's not fun. What can we do if we can't just keep adding weight to the bar? First thing that we're going to do is add reps, so we can continue to add reps to our sets at the current weight that we are at, that we feel good at. So if you're doing sets of 5, again, with a weight that feels pretty heavy, we're not ready to go heavier, or we really can't, then let's just try to add reps to this. So maybe we try to push for 6. Cool. We reach that intensity. We push 6 until that intensity comes back down. Now we push for 7. Then we push up to 8. And this is where something like the double progression method comes into play. What that is you're given a rep range. You're given a rep range and an intensity. So let's say it's a 6 to 8 rep range. The RPE is 8. So we're looking for an 8 out of 10 on this set. The goal is to pick a weight that you can get 6 for at that 8 RPE. So you push that and you keep progressing up in reps until you get to 8 at less than an 8 RPE. So once I can get 8 reps at like a 7 or a 6 RPE, now I'm going to bump the weight back up and repeat the whole process. So this is where something like that really comes into play, and adding reps can also help you add weight, but add weight at a reasonable pace so that you can kind of keep up with it, and you're not just pushing heavier and heavier, and every, training session is super taxing. It's like, oh man, I got to put more weight on the bar. No, I just got to get one more rep today. So that's a great way to do it. Or like I said, you can just add reps to your set until you get up to a point that, either the session takes too long or it's just too much volume and you can't recover from that much volume. Then we'll bring the reps back down and start the process all the way over. For muscle growth, you can go up to like 30 reps, but again, not the funnest way to train if you've ever done like sets of 30. I don't normally recommend ever going over like 20 maybe 25 if you're, burning it out at the end of a workout. But you can progress the reps all the way up to there at a certain weight. But then again, we have to take time into consideration. If we're doing everything at super high rep ranges, the session's just going to take a while. It's going to also take more recovery costs because you're doing more volume. So what is that sweet spot for you where you get to a rep range where now it's time to start the process over, add weight, and then kind of gradually go back up in reps? Find that rep range that works for you and the muscle groups and the exercises that work to push that in the rep ranges that feel good for you, you're able to recover from, and you continue to make these adaptations. So you can keep doing that. Another one that's in this kind of basic category. So we kind of get like, okay, I'm getting stronger if I can do more weight, if I can do more reps. The last one we can add is more volume. So we can just, and when I say volume here, I'm talking sets. So we'll just add an extra set onto it. If we're, routinely getting to that third set of 5, and it's like, it's a pretty comfortable 6 or 7 RPE. It's like, okay, maybe I can add another set onto here, get some more volume, and that way continue to make those adaptations. And as I fatigue a little bit, the intensity is pushed on that last set. That's a great way to kind of do it, and just continue to add that volume. Again, time considerations. How much time do you have to continue adding sets? Also, the recovery cost. We can't just do all of the volume for all of the muscle groups at the same time. So maybe we run more specialization phases here where we're adding volume to a certain muscle group at one time, running that for a few weeks, and then we kind of move on to a different muscle group. The other muscle groups go to maintenance so that we're able to recover. So with all these progressive overload methods, the biggest thing that's going to hold you back from continuing to make progress is time and recovery cost. So those both need to be considered and understood when you're kind of playing with these variables and doing all these different things and trying to do all this different stuff in the gym. Now, also, this does not mean that you should be switching your program over and over and over again. So we have all these different methods of progressive overload, but that doesn't mean I should just be adding reps and just adding different stuff in and doing all this different stuff to confuse the body and continue to give it novel stimulus, and that's going to make me progress. No. So understanding how to progress properly, you need to spend time learning how to do the movements, learning the exercises, and learning the weights that you can push to the intensities that you need to. So whenever you start a new program, the first session is always a little bit weird. You're kind of feeling out the weight, feeling out the different exercises, learning what you need to do. Then you kind of get your starting point. That's almost like an acclimation session. The second session is going to be the best one. Now you got your great starting point. You know exactly where to go, and then we can start to make progress. But we need to spend some time there doing these things so that we continue to make progress and we understand when that progression method stops working. When can I no longer add weight to the bar? When can I, no longer add reps? When is it not feasible? So spending time there to make sure that progression method has actually stalled out, because a plateau it doesn't really happen until maybe like 4 to 6 weeks. You can spend that much time there at the same, weight and reps and then break through. It doesn't necessarily mean after a week or two, if you haven't made all these gains, that you need to change everything up. But maybe pushing yourself to add the reps, add the weight, add the volume can be a really great way to make sure that you're making progress, but make sure that you're spending time making this progress. I should have caveated that at the beginning, but I want to make sure that I make that very clear that whenever we're talking about these progression methods, we need to implement them for a significant period of time, said at least 4 to 6 weeks, probably longer. We can, especially at the beginning stages, you can add weight to the bar until it stops. A lot of beginners will do that with. We'll take them, we'll just keep adding weight to the bar until it gets to that point where it's like, okay, I'm tapped out. Then we have to switch a variable. So do it for as long as you're making progress before deciding to change any of these variables. All right, so if we can't do the basics, we're at the point where we can't add more weight, We can't really add more reps because we just don't have time. The volume is too much to recover from. Now, what do? What are the variables that we can adjust in our exercises to make sure that we're still making progress and be able to track progressive overload? So the first one I'm going to go for is increasing range of motion. This should be something that everyone is focused on anyway, but I think it's a really great way to kind of jumpstart your progress again, especially if you don't want to add weight to the bar. So let's imagine you're squatting down to parallel. You get to a weight where I can no longer bump it up or I no longer want to. What do? Okay, let's do a deeper squat. Let's get into a deeper squat. Make sure we stretch the muscles out more, get more tension on the muscles in that deeper stretch position, spend more time through the movement, so more time under tension as well. And we don't have to bump the weight, we just continue to push ourselves into further and further ranges of motion. If you need to adjust the exercise, add a box that is below your parallel so that you force yourself to get down to it. Train yourself into that range of motion. That can be a great way. Adjust different machines to get more range of motion. If you've tapped out on the leg extension, add a pad that is going to stretch your legs back further, stretch your quads out more, lean back, stretch out your hips. Getting more stretch on the quad, more range of motion is a great way to help yourself make more progress and push that intensity much, much higher, because it is moving through a further range of motion and putting more tension on the muscle, which is how we grow muscle. We stimulate muscle by placing tension on it. The most tension is going to be placed in the stretched position, and it is about the time that we spend in that tension. So if we increase the range of motion, we place more tension in the stretch position, which helps us grow muscle, and we place more time under tension, just placing more overall tension on the muscle. So find ways to increase range of motion. Know when you're no longer making progress on range of motion. Either A, you feel discomfort in the movement and you just can't get to that point. Again, maybe then we can lighten the load, lower the reps, push into deeper ranges of motion. That helps us push the intensity. Or we have just reached the maximal point that we are going to be able to go in that range of motion. If you're stretching your chest all the way back and you start to feel pain in your shoulders or something like that, okay, now we've reached the full stretch that we are going to get. Now we can do some different things here. So there's other stretch and tension variables that we can play with. The first one I'm going to use is slowing down the tempo of the exercise, specifically that eccentric portion. So the stretching out of the muscle portion of the movement. So going down on a squat, letting the weight go away from you on a row. So slowing down that eccentric tempo, I think, can be a great way to help make progress without changing the weights as well. And when we've reached that full range of motion, how do we make more progress? Let's just do it slower. Again, more tension. Now, more tension does not always mean time under tension, but adding time under tension can increase tension and increase the difficulty and intensity of the exercise. So this is a variable that we can play with. It's not something we have to use all the time. Again, there is a time consideration here. We can't just make everything as slow as humanly possible. And exercises don't have to be that slow. I'm sure you've heard slow eccentrics are the key to growth. Yes, but anything from a 1 to 2 second rep up to an 8 second rep is basically about the same thing. So why would I even say to slow down the tempo? Well, if you've never done it, it can be a great way to make sure that you're getting that full stretch. If you have to do it very, very slow, we are making sure that we're getting all the way to whatever that stretched position is. So it can help us get more length and more range of motion if we do it slower. Also build that mind-muscle connection to understand and feel that muscle stretch out. We have to fight that stretch all the way, and we're thinking about that muscle. So it builds that mind-muscle connection. Also, If we've never gone that slow, it's probably going to increase the intensity. By increasing the range of motion and increasing the mind-muscle connection, we will likely be stronger when we go back to normal reps and we're able to get that stretch reflex and understand how to control and get to that fully stretched position, maximally placing tension on the muscle. So this can also help us get stronger by building that mind-muscle connection and having to stay in our form longer. If you think about going down really, really slow on a squat, you really have to think about everything maintaining its form and hold that position for a longer period of time, which will make you stronger in that position. So this can help you gain strength as well. Next one is utilizing a pause. Now, all of these things can kind of be put together, but I like utilizing pauses because, again, it puts the tension in that stretched position, especially if we're pausing at the hardest part, the most stretched out part of the movement, the bottom of a squat, the end of a row. We're holding that, letting that lat stretch out, holding it there, and then pulling in. That can be a great way to progress without adding weight. If you add that pause at the hardest part of the lift, again, we're getting more time under stretch, more tension under stretch, and more tension on the muscle in general. So we don't necessarily have to add more weight. We can actually probably decrease reps and volume because that time under tension and placing that much tension in that position is going to get us the intensity that we want. So even if the recovery cost might be a little higher at first from getting used to being in that stretched position and that eccentric, maybe over time we're able to actually recover better because we can do less volume with those pauses. And for strength, this is also great. By pausing in the hardest part of the movement, we're going to get stronger through that by holding that form and being able to then explode the bar off your chest or explode yourself out of the hole in a squat. You should be able to get stronger with that pause, and it'll help you through those sticking points, quote unquote, or the place that you typically fail a lift, like a couple inches off your chest on a bench or just above parallel on a squat. Utilizing these pauses can help you with strength as well. And that obviously, trickles all the way down to if you get stronger, you can do more volume, you can progressively overload and then build more muscle. So they work both ways. The last one that has to do with length and tension is length and partials. We're going to add these to the end of our sets on exercises that it makes sense to do. So what a length and partial is exactly what it sounds like. You're just doing the end range of motion. You're contracting the muscle as far as you can and then going all the way back to that stretched position. So basically the idea is there's been studies that have shown that these length and partials lead to more muscle growth than just normal exercises. I think the biggest thing is people that are doing length and partials at the end of their sets just end up doing more volume. Think about it. If we're both doing full sets of 8, so full ROM sets of 8, and then I get to do 8 partial reps after, you don't do any. I spend 8 more reps in that stretch, placing stretch tension and more tension on the muscle. It obviously should lead to more muscle growth. I'm doing more volume. Now, you might think, well, isn't that going to mess with my recovery? Like, am I actually going to be able to do that? But I think by not doing full reps and just keeping that stretch tension for as long as you can, I think it actually lowers the recovery cost. So adding length and partials to the end of your set. So again, kind of what we're looking at here is, say I do my set of 8, and that's about failure. That's a 10. I can't do any more full reps. So I get all the way back to that stretched position, and then I just do as many partial reps as I can. I squeeze as far back, say it's a row, I squeeze as far back as I can, and then let that stretch back out, squeeze as far back. And you can continue to do this, I think, until you really don't feel that contraction in the muscle. I think that's probably about where you should just terminate the set if you really can't contract the muscle at all and you're just stretching. Now, weighted stretching, I guess, can be a way to, stimulate hypertrophy, but is that really what you want to do, is just sit there and stretch with weight on in the gym? But adding these length and partials can help you add more volume without adding weight and, increase that tension on the muscle for a lower recovery cost. Now, pick exercises for this that actually make some sense. Don't do this on back squats. If you reach failure on a back squat, doing lengthened partials is not going to be, good for you there. Now, what we can do is maybe add like 1.5 reps. So we come down, do a quarter rep, and then come all the way back up. And we can push that to just get more time in that stretch position. If we're trying to build muscle in our legs or just, build strength in that bottom part of the lift, that can be a good way to do it. Now, don't push those quite toward failure, but that's a way to use lengthened partials on something like a squat. But pick exercises that it makes sense that you can fail and, there's no risk of death, with a bar on your back or something, and that actually makes sense. So, a row is a really good one. I really like lengthened partials for the back, for like calves, any sort of isolation exercises with your arms. Lengthened partials are a great way to go. One other thing I want to add with lengthened partials, and I guess this kind of ties in with increasing range of motion, is find exercises that increase tension in the stretch position. So the one I think about all the time is like a cable lateral raise versus a dumbbell lateral raise. So if we think about what we're trying to do with a lateral raise is we're trying to grow the medial delt. So when we do a dumbbell lateral raise, we come up. The only tension is in the shortened position here. When we come down to our side, that's when the muscle is stretched out the most, but there's no tension on my shoulder, on that muscle specifically when I'm holding the dumbbells. But if I'm doing a cable, when I come down, that cable is still pulling my shoulder down and around. I'm still holding that tension there. So that's increasing the tension, and this is great for, again, lengthened partials because we can just do the bottom stretch position of the movement, and good for increasing tension and increasing range of motion. So that kind of plays in there as well. I wanted to throw that in. Now, any of those 4 I just mentioned in the stretch and tension progressive overload technique can all be used together. They can be mixed and matched. Like I said, you're doing slow eccentrics. Maybe you pause in that eccentric as well to maximize that tension. Again, not having to do quite as much weight and matching the intensity. But make sure that we are tracking how we are progressing with all of these movements. So counting the tempo, making sure that we're doing the same amount of seconds and getting to that intensity. And when that intensity is not as hard, now we slow that tempo down another second. That pause, the same thing. We're counting that pause, measuring our intensity, and then when we reach a lower intensity than we're intending to, we can bump that pause up. Now for the pause, I don't recommend anything more than 5 seconds. For the tempo, I don't recommend anything more than 8, just because it's been shown that 8 is no better than 2 or 3 seconds. So I don't see a point in doing longer duration sets just because of the time constraint. We still need to get a minimal amount of volume to make sure that we're growing. So with all of these things, make sure that you can get enough volume. Again, muscle growth, 12 to 20 sets per week. For strength, it can be anywhere from maybe like 6 to 12 hard sets a week. You can go as low as 6. I think probably 9 to 12 is probably about where you want to be for strength purposes. So make sure that you're still getting that minimal amount of volume. Then we can increase it in the future if we decide that that is a progressive overload lever that we want to pull. So those are really the main ones for muscle growth. Is, those first 3 are for strength and muscle. These next one, the length and tension ones, are mostly going to be for muscle growth, because that's how we stimulate the most growth, is by getting that muscle to the stretched position and placing that maximal amount of tension on it. Now, there are some other methods that we can use specifically for strength. These aren't really going to help us with muscle growth, and I'll explain that as we go. So there's 3 more progressive overload techniques that I recommend that we can utilize to help us gain strength when we can no longer add weight to the bar. So one of them is actually going to be shortening the range of motion and overloading the weight. And when I say overloading the weight, I mean significantly. So we're thinking about here like a pin squat. So you put the pins up so that you're doing maybe a half or quarter squat, and that's halfway to parallel. And that's going to help us put more weight on the bar and be able to do more through that part of the range of motion. I look at this like putting a donut on your bat in baseball. You swing it, it's super heavy, and then you take the donut off and you can swing the bat like crazy. Now, one thing you can't do when you put that donut on is change your form. So you have to maintain that form to make sure that it actually does what it's supposed to and that you don't mess up your swing. You can't just throw a bunch of weight on your back, squat down to pins like you never squatted before, and expect it to help you. You want to be able to hold that form under the weight. That is what's making you stronger. So, like for my powerlifting meet, we did some pin squats for, a block of that peak training. And I think I got up to 600 pounds on my back. My max was 485 at the meet. That's what I squatted at the meet. I squatted 600 pounds to pins about a third of the way down in training. But that helped me to understand the feeling of the weight on my back, again, building that neurological connection, the confidence underneath that weight that I can hold anything. If I can hold 600, I can hold 500. I know this going in, so I'm very confident, and then I do everything exactly the same, squat down till I can't go any further, and then I just have to come up a little bit. I have the strength to be able to move through that short range of motion, which can help me build more strength. Now, because the range of motion is shorter, it's probably not going to really help us with muscle building. The way it would help is that we're just getting stronger, and that'll have its trickle down effect. As you can see, when we go back to normal training, we're able to add more weight to the bar. That will help us build more muscle, but this is not necessarily for muscle building. We're focusing on this for strength. You can do this with a pin press or a floor press. You can even do this with like a leg press, putting the safeties up higher. I don't know why you'd want to, but a rack pull, those kind of things are the shortening overload methods and significantly overloading so that you can do much more weight than you thought possible to, again, help build your form under heavier loads, build your confidence and your motor skills under those heavier and heavier loads, and help you continue to adapt. That can be a great way to put that donut on your bar. Next one, we're going to utilize what's called accommodating resistance. So you may have seen people put like bands or chains on the bar. That is accommodating resistance. They're not just being meatheads and banging stuff around that looks cool in the gym. There's actually a point to this. So as the band stretches out, the exercise gets heavier at the top of the lift. So, on a squat, on a bench, at that lockout position, the weight actually gets heavier because that band has more tension on it, or more chain is coming off of the floor. Again, not just doing it to look cool. We're changing the strength curve, the resistance curve of the exercise so that we can get stronger through certain parts of the lift. This can be great if you do have a sticking point at that lockout on deadlifts, or even, your bench or your squat, or any lift in general. But this accommodating resistance can be a great way to change the resistance curve, get you stronger through certain parts of the range of motion that will help you, again, as you go back and try to add more weight. Now you are able to, because you're stronger through certain ranges of motion. So I think this is a great way to, not necessarily be adding weight to the bar, to just switch things up psychologically because you're not ready at that point to add more weight, or adding more weight is doing something to you mentally. Let's just change the resistance curve and keep pushing in a different way, making that progress. Track your bands, track your chains, again, track intensity. All of that stays the same so that you can continue to make progress, so that when we go back into our next block of normal training, hopefully we're able to add some more weight to the bar and be stronger through that range of motion. So that's why accommodating resistance kind of works. Again, with bands and chains, you're making the exercise hardest in the shortened part of the lift. So you think about the top of a bench press, it's when your chest is maximally contracting. So you're not doing much to add to the stretch. So not necessarily a muscle building exercise, may have a trickle down effect, but I like this for strength much better. Last one, utilizing isometrics. So this is going to be kind of the reverse of the shortened range of motion, like the pin squat or something. We're actually going to reverse it and start underneath the pins and squat up into them. And then we're just going to push from that point in that form, just squeezing the muscles and pushing ourselves into that pin. This can be a great way to work through sticking points. So if you always get stuck right above parallel on your squat, put the pins right there and then just press up through it. It can help you hold that form and build some strength in that part of the movement so that when you get there, you can continue to push through. And this has a very low recovery cost because there is no eccentric portion or really even a concentric. It's just a constant isometric. So the recovery cost should be quite low. You'll probably feel something the first time you do it because you're not used to this, but the recovery cost should be quite low. And again, this is not really something for muscle building. Again, it gets you stronger so that you can lift more weight, but there's no eccentric portion. There's not even really a concentric portion. So isometric's probably not for muscle growth, but great for strength. These can be great for you as a strength athlete or just someone trying to learn how to get stronger and learn how to move. Like if you're doing one of these isometric exercises and, squatting up into the pins can help you build that mind muscle connection, understand what needs to be contracting and how to hold tight position. It can help you learn the movement, I think, and understand what it's supposed to feel like in certain positions. So I do find some value in this for even general population people who just want to get stronger and move better and make progress in the gym so that you feel better in the gym. Feeling better in the gym is a really big part that I don't know if we think about too much. Not everyone loves lifting. I'm imagining everyone here listening to me loves lifting, but I know plenty of people that don't. So if you can do anything to get yourself better and progress at just being better in the gym and having more confidence, it can allow you to have more fun, and that makes fitness better for everybody. So I think that can be a great consideration, even if you don't want to get maximally strong, utilizing some of these other progression methods to progress in different ways and keep things interesting. Again, make sure that you're taking the time to get good at these exercises and actually make the adaptations to them. It takes some time, especially when things are new. You spend at least a week or two just learning how to do it before you even start making real progress. So make sure that you understand why you're doing these things, why you're putting them in your program, why they're in there, and that way you spend the intention and the time getting good at them and making sure that you are constantly thinking about your intensity. Where am I at this set, at this intensity? Do I need to, what variable can I adjust at this point? Can I add weight? Great, let's do that. Could I add reps? Maybe I should do that. Do I have time to add another set? Do I have room in my recovery to add more volume on this muscle group? Cool, let's do that. So we can play with all these different variables if we know the intensity and we have that intentionality in each training session that we are going to make that progress in intensity because we are tracking it so often. So that is really all of the ways that I can personally think of to progressively overload. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that there's always more, but I think that is a great starting place. And there's plenty of levers to pull to make sure that we avoid plateaus and that we avoid, getting discouraged in our training. If you think the only thing you can do is add more weight to the bar and you get to that point where it's just not feasible, or, you're mentally drained from 12 weeks of hard powerlifting training and it's like, dude, I don't want to add any more weight to the bar. You're mentally and emotionally exhausted. It's a hard, stressful process on your body in every single way. So understanding that you can shift your training after a certain period of time when you've made those adaptations if you need to. And by doing something novel and, something different and understanding that there's a different, progression process and method can help get you excited about it again. So that's another reason to use progressive overload besides just, making sure that we keep making physical gains. Let's see if we can reignite ourselves mentally and emotionally to train. So to go over all those methods again, one more time, how to progressively overload. 1, keep adding weight to the bar. Add that weight to the bar until we no longer can mentally or physically or emotionally. It's a stressful process. Number 2, keep adding reps, utilizing things like the double progression method or just increasing reps until you kind of run out of time to get enough volume in your session. Then we need to bump weight and, redo that whole process again. But there's no set range. Again, there's certain goals for certain exercises. So strength exercises, keep them in the 1 to 5, maybe top end like 6 rep range. For muscle building, it can be anywhere from 6 to 30. So you have a ton of room to play with as long as you're pushing that intensity up above that 8, 9, 10 RPE, 2 to 0 RIR. So as long as you're pushing that intensity, any of those rep ranges work for muscle growth. Actually, I really think any rep range works for muscle growth. Now, going in the 1 to 5 rep range for muscle growth, probably not able to get enough volume. Plus, if you're pushing that intensity in that rep range, the weight is going to get so heavy and the recovery cost is so high. So that's why we don't necessarily recommend that from a muscle building perspective, but that's why focusing on what exercises you do and what rep range, understanding, how your body works, what you can recover from, what exercises drain you more than others, so that we can play with that intensity and pick rep ranges that work really well for that. Now, number 3, add volume. We can add an extra set, extra 2 sets, whatever it might be, whatever we have time for and whatever we have the recovery capacity for. So if we really want to add volume to our back, maybe we have to take volume away from our chest so that we can get enough work in and be able to recover from it. So we can continue to add volume as long as we have the time and recovery capacity, but that is another way to progressively overload. Number 4, increase range of motion. These are our stretch and tension progressive overload techniques, 4 through 7. 4 is increase range of motion, hashtag Team Full ROM. I'm not a actual member, but I'm a, amateur member, I guess. I definitely support the movement. Let's get to full range of motion. If you are not currently there, increasing range of motion can help increase intensity and difficulty, also help you move better. You'll build more muscle by getting more tension in the stretched position, getting more stretch in the muscle, and placing more overall tension in that movement, especially without adding weight if we continue to increase that range of motion. So pick exercises that work really well for this, adjust exercises as needed, add a box, add a deficit, add a pad, make sure the machine gets you a full stretch. Let your back round, stretch out your lats. I don't care. Make sure you stretch the muscle, get full range of motion. Number 5, slow down the tempo. Let's slow it down. If we have not done that, the weight should always be under control. We should never be doing an eccentric that is shorter than a second. So make sure that it's at least that slow, and then we can start to progress to slower and slower tempos up to maybe 8 seconds. Again, a time consideration here. And also, if you haven't done slow eccentrics, that eccentric stretching of the muscle is actually what's going to cause more soreness. So you may feel more soreness at first. You may have to pull the volume back a little bit, but we're going to increase that tension. So making sure that you're messing with the intensity or matching the intensity and making sure that you're getting to that point that you want to, again, without adding weight, maybe actually cutting weight and cutting reps by going a little bit slower. But it might help you make progress by building a mind-muscle connection and understanding how to get more stretch in the muscle. That will help us get more range of motion. So this plays into number 4. Number 6, utilize a pause. Do pause reps at the bottom, at the stretched position of the exercise, the bottom of a squat, the bottom of a bench, the stretched position of a row, whatever it may be, utilize that pause. That can be a great way to, again, get more tension in the stretched position, also get stronger through a quote unquote sticking point or the hardest part of the lift by spending more time there, understanding how to stay tight and then drive out of that hardest position. So it can be good for strength and muscle here, again, placing more stretch and tension. You can pause in the concentric as well. This can help build contractile tissue and, again, that mind-muscle connection. So it can be great in both spots. You can utilize both at the same time. You can utilize different ones at different times depending on your needs for the exercise. Number 7, adding lengthened partials. Add in as many lengthened partials as you can to the end of your set. Very low recovery cost, increases the stretch and increases the tension. Again, picking smart exercises. Don't try to fail a back squat and then say, I'll do length and partials in the hardest part of the lift. It's not going to work out well. Even a bench press, if I can't get it off my chest, I can't do a length and partial. That's where you can use maybe like 1.5 reps. Again, pushing to that intensity, but spending more time in the stretched position. That's a great way to use length and partials without, the risk of, failing the lift completely and crushing yourself with the bar. But pick different, safer exercise, smarter exercise. I won't say safer. No exercise is inherently safe or dangerous. It's all about how you do it and what load management you're working with. The load and volume management has much more to do with quote unquote injury risk than, the exercise selection. But pick length and partials that work for you. Like I said, I love them in back training, calf training, arm training, even isolated leg training, leg curls, leg extensions, all that stuff. Great for length and partials. That can be a great way to add volume, increase tension, increase stretch without a high recovery cost and without adding a ton of extra time as well. So that's a great way to do it. Then the last three, mostly for strength, we're going to shorten the range of motion and totally overload the weight. Putting that donut on the barbell, just getting used to heavier and heavier weights. Make sure that you maintain form as much as possible because strength is still specific. So we need to get stronger. We'll only get stronger in that range of motion, but just again, understanding what the weight feels like on your back, understanding what the weight feels like in your hands is a really big key to having the confidence and developing the neurological skills to be able to make a lift and adapt to be able to hold the weight that you need to do. So that's a great way to bust through strength or just switch up your training a little bit if you just can't keep adding weight to the bar mentally or emotionally. Utilize accommodating resistance. This can be another great way if adding weight to the bar is just getting too much, or you have that sticking point in your lift. Adding some bands or some chains or whatever accommodating resistance you can so that it changes the strength curve of the movement. Break through those sticking points. You don't have to keep adding weight to the bar. You'll be stronger through that end range of motion when you get back to lifting normal weights. Hopefully that will help you bust through to that next step and help your recovery along the way. Since you're not lifting as heavy for so long, maybe we can recover a little better and get right back to it and get stronger when we do get back. And then the last one is utilizing isometrics. This is going to be the opposite of number 8. So instead of shortening the range of motion, we're just focusing on one part of the range of motion. So doing like a reverse pin squat. So squatting up into the pins with the bar on your back. Maybe you place it right above where you're right above parallel, that sticking point. This is great for these. So on a bench, it would be the same thing. You're pressing up into the pins and really just pushing against it, holding that form and focusing on contracting as hard as you can, holding that isometric contraction. This can help us through those ranges of motion and help us to build some strength there as well. So those last three are really focused on strength. Notice the shorter ranges of motion. The accommodating resistance is hardest at the shortest muscle part of the lift, like at the top of a bench press when your chest is contracted. These don't necessarily lead to as much muscle growth, but they can make us stronger and help us to, eventually get bigger over time if you want to utilize some of these. And they can be great just for, again, the psychological aspect, getting a fresh perspective to lift. Sometimes it's fun to bench with chains on the bar. It can be cool. So, try it out. And if you do enjoy it and you push it really hard, you'll probably make some adaptations and continue to progressively overload. And that is really the key to all of this, is keep making progress in whatever way you can. Whatever is working for you at the time, physically, mentally, emotionally, with your time constraints, just make sure that you are pushing that intensity, matching your intensities, and hitting the intensities that you need to for your goal. If it's strength, let's get to at least that 6-7 RPE, maybe a little bit higher in the times that we can when we're able to recover from that, or when we just need to push max loads. Or, if it's muscle growth, nothing really below an 8, I don't think is even worth it. Again, for compound lifts that really fatigue you, maybe you can pull back a little bit, but you want to be getting to that 8 to 10 RPE, 2 to 0 RIR to make sure that we're building muscle. And whatever progression method you're using, making sure that that is getting you to that intensity, because that is truly the key, is to keep pushing the intensity and progressing in whatever way that you can. And that is how we are going to reach our goals in the gym. And that is my lifting cue for progressive overload. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please like, rate, subscribe wherever it is that you get your podcasts. And follow me on Instagram at CoachQ_fitness for more content, at CoachQ on Facebook. DM me, let me know what you thought of the podcast. Leave a comment on my post if you have any questions that you want answered on the podcast. This is the Lifting Cues podcast. I want to answer all of your lifting questions and then give you my lifting cues to help you again reach your goals as a lifter so that we can keep crushing it in the gym and build this huge community as lifters. And until next week, lifters, I'll see you then.